Hello and welcome to CS264. This is Lecture 2 and this is Lesson 4. And in this short lesson I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the more advanced and certainly more interesting aspects of .NET Framework, and in particular how to use C# capabilities to build a REST API. So it's important that you don't have to worry that you don't understand how to do all of this with .NET yet, but you do understand Model View Controller, for example, because you studied it last year, and you do understand REST APIs, and you do understand how to test REST APIs using Postman. So you should be familiar with a lot of it. You just probably haven't seen how to do it with .NET, and in particular, you haven't seen how to do it using ASP.NET Core. So really, in order to get this up and running, I just went to the Microsoft website and they had a tutorial on creating an API with ASP.NET Core. And the link is here, so you can just click through to the link in this document and you'll be able to find it and work through it yourself. I really wanted to ensure that my installation of .NET worked for everything, really. And it pretty much worked straight out of the box. I had a few small errors relating to trust certificates that I was able to fix fairly straightforwardly. So I wasn't too worried about that. But bottom line is that the app creates a to-do application. And really it's nothing new for you here. Really it's very similar to the sample ones that we built last year. And really you're interested in having an API that gets some to-do items, selects an individual item, and posts a new to-do item. And there's a whole bunch of, we have put and delete, of course, and we know all about that already. So in order to make it work, you're going to be working with Microsoft REST framework, and you're also going to be working with the Entity Framework elements. So the Entity Framework is just a set of technologies that supports the development of data-oriented software applications within .NET or then within ASP.NET. So for this demo REST API, the framework is used to maintain an in-memory database that you can develop so that you can develop a standalone app for practice. So you don't have to install any database software or make any connections like you did previously to MongoDB, although you can do that as well, of course. And it also uses the Model View Controller design pattern. And this is taken directly from the example. So you have a client that makes a HTTP request to an MVC app, has a controller. The controller handles the database access layer, and then you have a model that allows you to be able to to control all of the data, and this is held in memory for you, and this generates a view really that you can look at, and the view of course is from the API description that we saw earlier. So you can look at the example here and work through it. So I installed the example by following these instructions here. It's a very simple, it's a web project, whereas previously you would have looked at the console-based application. You can create a new, straightforward, easy web application by saying .NET new web API, and I created it in a directory called to-do API. Went into that directory. I added a package for the Microsoft Entity Framework Core, so it essentially held included some information on how to set up SQL Server, and then one for working with an in-memory database. And then I opened everything in Visual Studio Code, which I have here. So here's my Visual Studio Code. Here's the app. There's a few extra setups and folders and all that kind of stuff that we would have seen, project files that we would have seen from our console app. But in this particular case, you'll notice that there's some controllers, and by default it gives us this weather forecast controller. You'll see there's a to-do items controller which I added as part of the example of the tutorial. We have some models, and we have a context where we can use the Entity Framework service, and we have the to-do item for the model, which is not surprising. Then there's a bunch of other things that we don't need to worry about just now. You'll notice this weather forecast CS and program.cs, which is the one we would normally end up running. So when we can see that the program itself looks a little bit longer, we can have a quick look at the model. Here's a to-do context. I added this to-do item. So this is just a description of the model, and there's not too much too different here really, to the previous one. So we can just work through that example ourselves. So anyway, you don't have too many steps to do to get it up and running. You just have to add the model class that's used by the app. Then later you have to register a database context that coordinates with HTTP Framework Network functionality. And then that registration ensures that the database becomes available to the controllers. And of course, the database is an in-memory one. You're going to have to add the controllers. And so the controller that I added as part of the example was I added one for HTTP post method. And all that does is allows you to add something to your database. You can access it using this HTTPS localhost 5001 API / to-do items, and it is not unlike when you created something using Express and Node.js. You would set up a local web server, if you like, HTTP server as part of the app, and then you could access it using your API. So you don't have to make too many changes to get the get CRUD functionality working. They just work. You can actually access a to-do item, the full list, or an individual one by specifying the item. So it's no different really to anything you would have worked at previously. So let's have a look at it working. I have the software here. You'll notice I have it running. I'll just open this a little bit more so you can see. So I'll just stop the running here. So it stopped running. The application is shutting down here. Okay, when I get a dollar prompt back again, I can run it. So I'll just go .NET run. And the application will start up. And you'll see that it begins, that we know now it's listening here on HTTPS localhost 5001. If you go there directly, what will happen is that it'll just give you some error because it said you can't resolve it because there's no route to that particular link. So, but you can crank up Postman like I've done here, and you can look at weather forecast. And we have the API call here in Postman. I'll click send, and we get that API data back. Now this is built in. It's part of the default app. Like when you created a console app, you would have had a Hello World application created. When you create a web API app, it creates this weather forecast one. So you can just check and make sure it all works and runs, and you can get a little bit better. So let's have a look at the to-do item. So we can look at a get for the to-do items here, and send, and there's nothing. It's just an empty setback. Well, that's not surprising because it's an in-memory database that runs every time that launches every time we run the program. So we need to add something to it. So we had created as part of the example a post request. I've one saved from here earlier. So here's our post and the body. I included some JSON in the body. So basically the to item is what the name of it and whether it's been completed or not. Here we have to feed the cat. Here's the post method, API, send. And the return tells us that it's there, but now we can see we have an ID, so we know ID. Let's do one to feed the dog as well. Check the body, feed the dog, send. And now if we go and have a look at the list, again, I'm just using a get request for all items. We can click send, and we have the items that are there, and we can individually select an item as well. So let's look at item 1, send, and we just get individual items. So the web API works and functions almost exactly like the ones that you would have seen previously in CS230. So it's not too hard to get up and running with this. It works perfectly. Again, you'll have to add a controller for the to-do items, and I added that. You can see the various controllers are here. Here's the post controller. This is the delete controller. I didn't touch this one at all. The get, I presume we expect to see, there's the get controller and how they work. And if you work through the examples, it'll explain how these things work. And we'll see a little bit about how and what all this kind of stuff means as we work through the course. So I would recommend that you work through the example. It's really important. You don't have too many steps to perform it in order to get it up and running. You'll have to add that model class, as I said already, and then you don't have to do anything to get the get methods running. The example also provides you with information on how you work through put an item. That's like essentially making an update and deleting an item. So you could try that yourself as well. So my recommendation will be that if you have time, work through the example. Whenever you become comfortable with C# programming, it's going to be really useful for you if you want to become an expert in API development using .NET. And remember, .NET is a cross-platform compatible setup, so you'll be able to use it anywhere you want, and offers you another approach to web development. You don't have to use Node.js everywhere. So the tutorial is great. It's a great site, and it also offers you some examples on how to use Razor Pages. And that's a simplified web application programming model that uses file-based routing approach, and it also uses the Entity Framework Core with ASP. So you could try that. Have a look at the introduction to Razor Pages. Have a look into the full Razor Pages tutorial, and you can get some really nice software up and running very, very quickly. You just have to work through the tutorials, and I would recommend that you skip over and make notes of the parts that you don't yet understand when you're working. Don't get wrapped up in the fact that I don't understand every single line of code. Work through and get to the end, and then go back and start looking at the bits you don't understand, because sometimes repeated visits help with the understanding once you have a sense of the overall application structure. As I said before, unfortunately, we don't have time to do this kind of work because this is a software design module, but I'd certainly recommend that you do that. Okay, so that wasn't too difficult. Please work through the example. It's a REST API using C#, very powerful, and .NET's a very powerful environment, and you can do lots with it, not just the simple console apps that we'll be working with during this particular application. Okay, this module. Thank you very much for watching.